Just make sure I don't pick my nose or anything.
I am joined from Shreveport, Louisiana, by Andrew McKevitt, who goes by Drew, who is a professor in which department? I'm so sorry.
So we're actually technically called the School of Human Inquiry,
That's why I didn't
which
know it. Because it's one of
it's a
those,
it's a brand new title too.
one of
It's a
those
brand new
departments.
title. That's
But
right.
you're at Louisiana Tech,
That's right.
which is an hour east of Shreveport, but you're trained as a historian, right? PhD.
Yeah, that's right. PhD in history, Temple University. I spent
Hmm.
15 years of my life in Philadelphia. Grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm trained as a historian of U.S. foreign relations. In fact, that's my
Right.
background.
And we're here to talk almost not at all about that, although
That's right.
there will be some on that though. I will be sure to inject that. But no, but so we're here to talk about I think it's the one political issue. I think it's the political issue on which I have been most ambivalent in my life, and I still am. And this is one of the reasons I've had you here is guns. You wrote this amazing book, came out in 2023, that probably three-quarters of my audience will be at least highly suspicious of. I think they need to read it.
The
And I,
best readers are the suspicious ones too,
well, I think
truly.
they need to read it. I mean, so let me just, it's on the history, it's trying to explain why we have the gun culture in America that we have today, basically, right? And we're going to get into the argument, but so just to lay out what you're doing here, and the number of guns we have, which is somewhere between 500,000 and 2 billion, somewhere, right? I mean, roughly. Um, it's your book explains those two things, why we have the gun rights, gun freedom culture that we have, and as big as it is, right? And why we have so many guns. And so we're going to get to the argument as that you make, but that's what your book does, and it does in ways that are new to me, and I think should be new to most people, even who are hardcore gun rights people, otherwise known as gun nuts. Many of those are my friends, though, so I hang out with them. Now, here's my story, Drew. So I grew up in a communist family in Berkeley in the 1970s, right? So Berkeley, of course, has always had complete gun control, not surprisingly, right? I don't even know how you could go about purchasing a gun in Berkeley and owning it. So I want you to guess how where I first saw my first gun that wasn't on a cop, on a private citizen. Who do you think I saw it with?
Was it the Panthers?
You're like halfway there.
Halfway there. Okay.
The Panthers headquarters was 5 blocks from my house where I grew up in
Uh-huh.
Berkeley,
Uh-huh.
South Berkeley. No, it was a member of the Spartacist League,
Okay.
which was
Communist. Yeah.
yeah, hardcore
Right, right,
communist
right.
militant little revolutionary group that had a little minute in the 70s. And my parents' best friend was a member of the Spartacist League, and I was in his house one day, and I was a kid, I was like 8, 7, something like that, and I see a fucking gun in a holster. And the thing is, right, when you grow up in Berkeley, right, probably New Jersey too, which is where you're from. I mean, it's just, I don't know, at least from a lefty family, I'm still to this, I can't get over it. I'm 60 years old. I'm still terrified of the goddamn things, right? Just fundamentally in my bones. And I've been trying so hard, hanging out with libertarians, listening to all their arguments, being persuaded by basically all their arguments too. But I
Mhm.
still hate the goddamn things. And I kind of still wish deep in my heart that God would come down and just melt them all down. But then I also know, then the state would have basically unimpeded power over me and the
Right.
citizenry. So we'll get to that. So that's where I am, man. I've been so ambivalent on this. Now, the thing is, what makes me so unhappy vis-a-vis the gun issue, I mean, truly unhappy, is the number of guns and the number of uses of guns, of course,
Mhm.
right? And so that's actually what your book attempts to explain. In large part, I would say, in large part, it attempts why we have so many, and I guess why they've been used so frequently in a sense too, but certainly why we have so many,
Mhm.
which just freaks me out. Um, so I had Cody Wilson on this show. I don't know if do you know who that is? Do you know who Cody Wilson is?
Is that
Ghost Gun.
the yeah, ghost gun guy, 3D printing guy? Yep, yeah, of
Yep.
course.
Yeah,
The
he's a friend of
defense
mine.
deterred. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. We've done a bunch of stuff together. Guys, been on the show. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant guy.
Hmm.
And he said, he thinks there's at least 1 billion guns. because of the ghost guns. And then
Yeah.
he also his line is, I forget what does he say? It's gun control is now impossible. Like we've now won. All right. So that's where I am. Okay. And I want
Hmm.
you to take me to the right position on this. Okay. That's your job in this hour and a half or whatever we're gonna do here. You're gonna take me to the right position. I'm gonna come away with this knowing where I now really stand on guns.
Wait, wait, wait. I don't even know what the right position is. I don't know where you are. I don't know where I am. I don't know where to lead you. As a historian, I often think about like my question is how did we get to where we are, right? And so to me, I began with the question of like
Oh,
it's 1945, right? And there's
yeah.
45 million guns in the country. And then 80 years later, there's 450 or more million guns in the
Right.
country, right? So how do we get 10 times
Right.
as many guns? Because when I think about like what is my position is Cody Wilson's position. It's too late. There's no gun
Oh,
control.
is
It's
it?
we are well beyond we've crossed the Rubicon, gone across the threshold, whatever you want to
Oh.
say. The moment to do that might have been 1968 when there was both the political will and the a much smaller kind of stockpile of
Mm-hmm.
firearms in civilian hands.
Mm-hmm.
But I think anyone who's proposing any kind of massive sweeping gun control to control at least half a billion guns, if not a billion guns, it's a fool's errand. I don't think there's anywhere to go there. So I don't know if I have a position I want to convince you of. That's
Okay.
as the historian, right? We're always thinking
Okay.
about like how do we explain the present? I don't know. I don't
Good.
know if I often feel kind of fatalistic about this because I feel the same way as you do. On the one hand, like there's too many people injured and killed by guns every year. 50,000 people is an unacceptable number of people, even if you're going
Sure.
to blame it on the one hand, gang violence,
Of
or
course.
you're going to
Sure.
attribute it to suicides, right? Because upwards of
Mm-hmm.
two-thirds of guns, that's still too many, right? What can we
Mm-hmm.
do as a society to do something about that? But on the other hand, I don't, I never think the solution is get rid of the guns. In
Mm.
part because I think the causes of gun violence are not rooted in people owning guns, and in part because we're too far gone at this point.
Yeah.
I think Cody's right. I mean, that's where
Okay.
we are. So
I'll tell him. He's gonna like to know
I'm
that.
sure I'm sure is really important in my opinion. What
He would no, I think
this,
it would. I mean, honestly, I think every gun rights person, the most hardcore among them, need to read your book. I'm going to say that again. So I have said this for many, many years. I too. So you actually started out in well, I guess yeah, you did foreign relations, right? Foreign policy history. That's what your main thing is, or
Yeah, yeah. I wrote a first book, real academic book on U.S.-Japan
Japan, yeah.
relations and consumerism. I mean, that's the two things that connects them, right? Because a lot of this book is
Yeah,
about gun consumerism after the Second
right.
World War.
Right. So I also I'm finishing a book on foreign policy, and so I've been interested in that for decades. And I've said for a long, long time that I've had a hard time finding a domestic issue that isn't directly connected to the empire in some
Mm.
way or another, right? And
Hmm.
lo and behold, here comes your book because I never would have get I mean, maybe if I had thought really hard, I could have guessed this, I suppose, on some basic level, but
Right, right.
the damn story of all the guns in this country and a lot of the gun culture in this country, guess what begins with World War II? Like
Yep.
so many things in domestic politics that people think is completely separate. No, this is a foundational role. I mean, World War II, the outcome of it, the U.S. participation in it, and then of course when capitalism meets the results of a war. But so let's talk about that, man. And it's an amazing story, like the first two chapters, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's that alone could be a movie. It could be a book on its own. The Samuel Cummings story, but the really it's the story of what happens after a major world war with all the damn guns. So why don't you can you just tell that story and maybe
Yeah,
some
sure.
nice
So,
details in it? Yeah.
it's the end of the Second World War. The United States, of course, is triumphant, is at that particular moment, responsible for 50% of all economic productivity around the world. All the real wealth and capital is concentrated in American hands at
Hmm.
the end of the Second World War. But of course, at the end of the Second World War, there's also tens of millions of guns sitting in warehouses in Europe and Asia. These guns are in the hands of governments that are not interested in distributing to them to their populations. that are
Hmm.
either
Hmm.
going through a sort of disarmament phase or they're transitioning to new sort of Cold War era weapons. And so you have tens of millions of guns sitting there with nothing to do. They're even just expensive to maintain these guns, right? You can't just let a gun sit around. Like you got to take care of it. You also have to guard it. You've got to, it's got
Hmm.
to be, you need security and things like that. Sometimes they would just take these guns to sort of get rid of them. They'd sail them out to the in the North Sea and just drop them in the ocean. So there's probably
Oh,
millions of guns, rifles sitting in the bottom of the North Sea right now, some 75 years later. And so, in this context, steps in, the figure you mentioned is this guy named Samuel Cummings, who I think is one of the most fascinating figures in the history of American capitalism and the history of American guns.
totally.
My kind of dream project is to write a biography of him. I think would be sort of fascinating and a movie too, right?
You'll
I mean,
get a
this
movie
guy's
out of
like,
that.
this guy is just made for a movie
Yes,
too.
he
And
is.
so Samuel Cummings, he's real young too. Like his first job out of college is to be a CIA analyst. It's right at the beginning of
Yep.
the Korean War. He's a gun nut himself, right? That's how he would
Hmm.
describe himself. He just loves guns. He's growing up, taking apart machine guns from World War One and like learning how they work and that sort of thing. And so he's just obsessed with guns. And so the CIA hires him right out of college to be an analyst for the Korean War. So they're sending him reconnaissance photos and he is describing what weapons Chinese soldiers are carrying, North Korean soldiers are carrying, that sort of thing. He can do that kind of visually.
Hmm.
And then shortly after that, they send him on a mission to Europe to buy these war surplus weapons. The CIA's goal is not to sell them on the consumer market. The CIA is thinking there's lots of guns in Europe. We need to move guns around the world in this early kind of Cold War chess match. So the CIA, they send him to Europe. He poses as a film producer
Hmm.
to buy guns as props for Hollywood films. And instead, he's buying all these guns up and he's sending them to the nationalists in Taiwan. He's sending them to every sort of anti-communist ally that the United States has around the world.
The CIA's motivation, right, was to keep the guns out of the communists' hands.
Right.
Basically, just want to point, right?
Keep the
So
guns out of the hands of the
geopolitical
communists.
interests, basically, are
Right. Very
from the
much.
get go in this story. Okay.
That's right. The
Okay.
CIA knows where the guns are. They want to know where the guns are, and they want them in the hands of either American allies or they want them in the hands of Americans. And that's where Samuel
Okay.
Cummings is really going to turn into this tremendous entrepreneur because he
Hmm.
leaves the CIA and he creates a company called Interarms. And he's going to use that knowledge from that trip to Europe of how to buy cheap war surplus rifles, leftover guns from the Second World War, how to buy them, import them to the United States, clean them up, sporterize them is the term he uses, and sell them to Americans real cheap. And so he starts doing that in 1954. And he's within a few years, he's going to become the world's largest private arms dealer because he's really the kind of first one in there to figure out the logistics network and to have his agents on the ground right across the street from defense ministries, like ready to swoop in there and buy used guns. And beginning in 1954 and all the way up until 1968, when the Gun Control Act is going to curb this activity, he's going to sell anywhere. I don't have the precise numbers, but estimates are anywhere from 5 to 8 million war surplus firearms. Sam Cummings is going to sell to Americans. Now, like, how does this help kick off a kind of gun buying spree in the United States? The first thing is he's selling them incredibly cheap, right? So, like a brand new, nice hunting rifle from a company like Winchester, Remington, something like that. In 1960, it might have cost you 150 bucks, right? And so today, that's probably well in excess of $1,500.
Right.
Cummings is selling them for $10, sometimes less. $10 for a brand new
Hmm.
rifle, not a brand new
Hmm.
rifle, a war surplus rifle. That, in many respects, is just as good as the hunting rifle made by Remington. These are weapons made for war, right? They've got to be made to withstand the rigors of the battlefield.
Yeah.
They can handle, a weekend hunting in the woods of Pennsylvania or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so what this does is it's going to create demand, and he knows this too. He's a real smart guy. He's writing about this all the time. He knows how this creates demand for guns because you get some guy, this is the post-war America. People have more money, they have more
Okay.
leisure time,
Okay.
recreation, they're interested in things like that. And so, this guy just thinks like, oh, sure, I'd love to get involved in hunting. I'd love to try it out. I'm going to go buy the $10 gun. And if I really get into it, maybe I'll go back and buy the $150 gun, right? Like that's
Hmm.
Sam Cummings' argument for how he's creating a consumer market. And, looking at the numbers, at the number of imports that come into the United States, at the number of guns sold generally in the United States in the 1950s and the 1960s, he's made the right argument because gun buying is booming during this era. We often think about it booming during the 1960s, and it does, and we could talk about that in the context of sort of urban uprisings and things like that. But it begins before that. It begins in the 1950s. It begins with this kind of sport shooting and hunter culture, and just the availability and accessibility of super cheap firearms, right? So, beginning in 1945, every 25 years, the number of guns is going to double in the United States. The number of guns in civilian hands is going to double, which is just sort of incredible to think of because the US population doesn't grow that much.
And basically unique in the world, right?
Oh, undoubtedly unique
Right.
in the world, right? I mean, if you think about just today, right, we have probably one. We certainly have more guns than people in the United States, maybe 1.3 guns per person in the United States. No other society comes anywhere near as close. I think number two is Yemen, where it's like
Hmm.
zero point 0.6 guns per person
And
or
they've been at
something like
war for
that.
20 years too. So,
That's right.
right.
They are very
Hmm.
much a society at war. And so, I think this begins with Cummings. I think this begins, and he's not the only importer. There's a lot of importers doing this, especially the more
Mm.
seedier side of this,
Mm.
which is really, I guess, chapter two of the book, are these
Hmm.
people importing these cheap handguns, right? A lot
Hmm.
of these handguns are made from like pot metal left over after the Second World War. Again, they're selling these things for sometimes as cheap as like $6 or $7.
Wow.
They're the kinds of guns where you fire them a couple times and the barrel's just going to start to melt because the metal is just so cheap.
Right.
But a lot of entrepreneurs seeing coming success in finding sources in Europe, they're going to go over to Europe too, and they're going to make connections that enable them to start importing these guns as well. And so it's really the imports, I think, that they're going to drive the price for guns down in the United States because guns are pretty expensive things, especially buying them at retail before the Second World War. It's really going to drive down the price. It's going to bring a lot of new people into the market, a lot of new consumers into the market. It's going to make the traditional mainline manufacturers, the Smith and Wessons, the Winchesters, who first try to stop Cummings, and then when they realize they can't, they're going to join the game too, and they're going to start offering sort of budget friendly models that are really going to flood the market in the 1960s.
Let's okay, so I want people to be clear about this. So $10 rifle in 1960 is roughly $100 in 2025 dollars.
Mhm.
Um, so basically anybody can afford it, right? Now,
Basically, anybody can afford it, including a known communist named Lee Harvey Oswald,
oh,
who's going
right,
to buy a an
an
Italian-made
Italian,
Carcano rifle that
right?
manufactured in 1940 for the war in Europe, and then purchased in 1963 through the mail for 1995. He
There
had
you
a
go.
scope included. It was more expensive because they fixed a scope
There
to
you
it.
go. We're going to talk about JFK too later. So for sure, he's a very important and interesting paradoxical figure in all this. So okay, so we have a social phenomenon, right, that we all accept as fact. In the 1950s, we see like this huge increase in gun ownership in the United States, right? Okay. So now you found out that this guy Samuel Cummings and these other entrepreneurs went to Europe, snatched all the guns, and then sold them super cheap on the market here. Okay. Now the question is, why did people buy them, right? He could have sold them and marketed them. He could have had ads in every newspaper, but people still don't always buy what's advertised, right? In fact, they
Right,
usually don't buy. You know that most products are fail, right? I mean,
right,
so
right.
now, gun ownership in the United States prior to World War II was generally higher than other countries, but not nearly what it is today, right? Do you have
Right,
numbers
for
on that
sure.
roughly?
Yeah, it's hard to count guns before sort of
Right.
the
Very
First
hard.
World War, right?
Very
So
hard, right.
there was, one of the things I mentioned in the book is the Eisenhower Commission. This is the commission that Lyndon Johnson appoints to sort of investigate guns in American history, and they do a great job gathering
Mm-hmm.
all of this data. A lot of what I have, I essentially came from their notes and things like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
the best they could tell is that, by 1945, it's a country of, I think, 120 or 140 million people, somewhere in there, and about 45 million guns, right? So you figure one gun for every roughly 3 or 4 Americans at that point.
Wow. Okay, so but there's a huge spike after World War II.
Mhm.
There's a massive
Right.
increase, unprecedented and globally unique. Americans are doing this unlike anybody else, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so the question is then, why did so many Americans listen to Samuel Cummings's advertisements
Right.
and buy the guns, right? So tell us what the content of the marketing was, because you employed this concept of, I think you call it, creating demand, which in
Hmm.
itself is controversial, right? I mean, some
Hmm.
people dispute the very idea that you can
Right.
create demand in people. I don't know where I am on this, but I think this is actually really helpful for that question too. Your book, not just about guns, but that about sometimes called consumer sovereignty, like who makes the decision
Hmm.
about what I want, right? Is it me
Right.
or is it imported, or is it imported into my mind? So tell us about the content of the advertising of Cummings and others in the 1950s. Let's just stay with the 1950s for now, right? Which is the first phase, and there's a next phase in the 60s. So yeah,
Yeah.
what were they offering? What were they selling?
They're selling plenty is
Mm-hmm.
essentially it. They're selling
Mm-hmm.
bounty, right? Like, Cummings advertising's the first ones and the ones he's publishing in magazines, right? These are gun magazines or pulp magazines in some cases. They're just sort of fascinating for how much they discard with traditional gun industry advertising, right? So you could sort of picture, the romantic image of the father and the son out on the duck hunt and, paint this almost sort of Norman Rockwell image that
Mm.
you might see from like a Remington ad in the 1920s
Mm-hmm.
and the 1930s. Cummings throws all that out the window. He's thinking that the thing I'm selling is plenty, it's bounty, it's
Mm.
abundance. And so, a Cummings ad will
Mm.
typically, they're usually, he'll take out a 2-page ad, right? And so on those 2 pages, gun people who are into guns, they've seen these kind of thing before. It's like you will see 25, 30 guns pictured just on those 2 pages, right? Real small, each one having a tiny caption, each one boasting of its just in rock bottom price, right? 9.95, 14.95, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Cummings is selling is the world's plenty. In some ways, he's selling the pitch is you, the American man, you went overseas to fight fascism, to fight empire. You won that war, and your reward is the world's treasure. I have gone around the world to find the world's treasure. Sometimes, he uses this voice. His retail front is called Hunter's Lodge, and so he portrays himself as the hunter here. It's this like character with like it looks like a Robin Hood kind of character, and so the hunter has gone around the world to comb the warehouses of defeated enemies and allies to bring the world's treasure back to the United States. So every ad would be like, I've got $30 million worth of guns in stock. I've got $9 billion with just like completely exaggerated figures. The idea being that you have earned the world's treasure by winning this war, by building the world's most prosperous society, the world's most free society where you can buy guns because in many countries you can't buy guns. And so the advertising shifts from this kind of traditional romantic connection to the American past, to family, to service, to instead just like pure, unabashed consumerism. This stuff is out there. Hoard it as much as you can while you can. I'm here to enable you to do that. And so he is in many ways a kind of cheerleader for the expansion of the gun consumer market, for bringing more people in to the gun consumer market.
Hmm.
And the question is like, well, does that work? You're absolutely right. Like this question of like consumer agency, the extent to which like you are making rational choices or you are being manipulated by capital or something like that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I have the answer to that. What I know is people were buying the guns. We also, you can point to the United States in contrast to say, I don't know, Italy or Poland or something and say, well, there are these traditions there that matter, right? when I call the United States, when I say it's a gun country after the Second World War, I'm not saying it wasn't a gun country before the Second World War. It's still it's very much the world's preeminent gun country before the Second World War, at least in terms of civilian ownership,
Yeah.
at least in terms of what it means to the average American citizen. But what happens after the Second World War is those mythologies become material reality, right? Like everyone looks to the gun as a
Mm,
symbol of American independence, as a symbol of American manhood, but it becomes affordable after the Second World War
mm.
in ways it wasn't necessarily and wasn't as accessible before the war. And so I think, when you bring in that cultural mythology, those social ideas that have been in the ether for decades, and you start to offer ways of accessing that, the market's going to explode, and that's what happens.
Wow. Mm. So I guess I'm surprised by the narrative of the 50s marketing. Um, so are you saying that the marketing by Cummings was simply aimed at guns, presenting guns as like a collector's item? Like it
Mhm.
was like the equivalent of like having a Nazi helmet or something, in the
Yeah, and in fact, it'll be right next to the ads for the Nazi helmets, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing it would often be marketed as war memorabilia,
Okay.
and every gun would always have this like little kind of brief paragraph narrative where he would describe what this sort of thing is, right? And so
Uh,
he would say like, this is the treasure of the British Army, or like this is the rifle that the Japanese Imperial Army used to conquer China, or the gun that the Soviets or the guns that the Finns used to fight against the Soviets, or something like that. There's always like a brief sort of story there, which is to draw the reader in. So you're not just buying a gun, but you're buying like a piece of history or something like that, and this is all
yeah.
available to you.
So he's not promoting them as useful objects. I mean, in other words, he's not talking about need to protect your family from crime or from communists or
Right.
he's not saying
Almost
that
none of
yet.
that. Yep.
Really?
Almost none of that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he'll talk about how they're valuable as like hunting rifles or something like that, right? Like if this is a rifle that can be used to fire, 200 yards away on a battlefield, it's certainly going to be good enough for you hunting deer in the woods of Pennsylvania or something like that.
So it's
Yeah.
not political, basically. Like in any like so,
No, no, no,
right?
no. I
Okay.
mean, yeah, it depends how you
Well,
define political,
right, I
right? I
know.
mean, he's very
Sure.
much a guy who's
That was stupid.
standing behind the Second Amendment and then the right of
Yeah.
individual of Americans to
That was
fight
stupid
against
of me
guns.
to say. That was very dumb. I'm going to take that back. No, of course it was political, but in a very particular way that's different than we think of now. It's the
Right.
politics of national nostalgia, you could say, things like that, right?
Totally,
But
totally, totally.
totally different politics than what came to be around guns just 10 years later or less than 10 years later. So and you're
That's a
saying,
great way of putting it too, right? Because I mean, there's no such thing as like gun politics as we think of it today in 1957. It's just not
yeah,
there. There's no like national debate about guns. There's no Democrats versus Republicans, liberals versus conservatives. There isn't anyone talking about the Second Amendment as the guarantee of one's individual right to own a firearm.
right, but at least 5 million people bought guns during that period too, right? So what it was in
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
was a powerful message, I guess, marketing
Hmm.
message, right?
That's right.
Uh okay, well that's and then what was it, 5 million? How many did he sell? Cummings?
So he personally, Interarms, his company, right? Probably somewhere between 5 and 8 million, just imports. Those are just the imports he brings in from overseas. He also has some domestic dealings. He sets up his own factories. This comes a little later in the 1960s, one in Alabama, one in Virginia. He's making like replica handguns. He becomes the first dealer of Colt's AR-15 in the early 1960s, the first retail
Mm.
dealer of it. So
Mm.
he's bringing it around the world and showing it off to dictators and presidents, and
Mm.
kind of pitching it as the next great thing for
Hmm.
military use.
I want to pick up on something on Cummings's deeper background. So I mean, it's just I forgot about the CIA connection, which is almost I should have almost expected it, right? But
There's even more to it.
I bet there
So
is.
there's more to it. So, I wrote about this a couple months ago. So in the JFK files released back in
Uh-huh.
March,
Uh-huh.
which
Oh.
removed a whole bunch of redactions, right? So all the
Oh.
JFK assassination heads, they looked at this and like, there's nothing really new here. We've mostly seen these documents before, but what the new
Hmm.
release did was remove a lot of redactions.
Mm.
So there was one document in there that I had also seen before.
Oh my.
It was a CIA memo about, I mean, this is so sort of like twisted how we get here. It's a CIA memo about a Ramparts article in 1967. Ramparts, kind of like New Left Berkeley. In fact, I think they were out of
I know
Berkeley.
those guys. Yeah.
You probably know those
I do.
guys,
Yeah.
communists out of Berkeley.
Robert
So
Shear. Yep.
it's a Ramparts article about a guy who claimed to that the CIA had been involved in Kennedy's assassination, who
Right.
himself turned up dead like 6 months later or something like
Right.
that. That's the
Right.
point of the article. But Sam Cummings is mentioned in there as an associate of this guy. So a CIA analyst takes this article and just sort of writes it up like what's going on here because they're monitoring US news sources. They want to, anytime the CIA comes up, they want to say, here's what Americans are thinking of the CIA.
Hmm.
In there, they include a biography of Cummings from his CIA file. We
Oh.
can't see a CIA file, right? We can't get
Oh.
access to anyone's CIA file. So they include a biography there of Cummings' CIA file. And there's a line in there that says Samuel Cummings is the owner and operator of Interarms, redaction, a company that sells firearms to Americans, importer, and the redaction is taken out, and it says Samuel Cummings is the owner and operator of Interarms, a CIA founded and funded company that imports and sells guns to Americans. So, I mean, the evolution of the story here is that Cummings company, the largest importer of firearms into the United States, the largest dealer of firearms into the United States, the largest seller to anyone, was created by the CIA in
And you didn't
1954.
know that
I
when
didn't
you
know
wrote the
that.
book.
So,
This is brand
when
new.
you're writing the book, like this is all brand new. This
Brand
just came out from this redaction in
Oh,
this one.
we're breaking news. This
We,
is incredible. No, but that's humongous. That's
It
huge.
is. You would
Wow.
think it's humongous, right? I'll tell anyone who wants to listen. Nobody seems as excited as you do. I'm glad you're excited about it. It is kind of incredible to think the CIA created the country's largest gun seller.